Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Um, Welcome to New Hampshire Network's Earth Day, Earth Week, Earth Month celebration 2025. Earth Month is a great time to take a look at one of our most immediate, direct, and visceral connections with the Earth, namely food. The ways we produce and distribute food globally, nationally, regionally, in state, have huge implications for the state of our Earth in terms of climate, in terms of chemical pollution, in terms of nutritional values, of course, and also in terms of social equity. And oddly, the ways we produce and distribute food are largely invisible to many of us most of the time, which is kind of strange when we think about it. But we're going to pull aside the curtain and have a look this evening. I'm Reinmar Seidler, member of the steering committee of the New Hampshire Network for Environment, Energy, and Climate. We're very, very pleased to have with us three experts in food systems, each of whom combines a close understanding of the practicalities of food production with a broad perspective on the extraordinary diversity of different ways food is produced today around the world. Now, before I introduce our speaker, let's recall that this event does take place in Ndakina, the ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude this land, these waterways, and the people who have stewarded Ndakina over many generations. This event is being recorded, and everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording, which will also be available on our website on the events page. And as always, please, everybody remember to stay on mute the whole time, but do please inscribe your questions into the chat. And thank you very much. We will leave time at the end for audience Q&A. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Kate Anderson is Director of the Food and Environment Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists, where she leads research and advocacy efforts to promote sustainable food systems, equitable access to healthy food, and fair conditions for food chain workers. An expert in environmental sociology and in agricultural policy, she previously directed Sightline Institute's Farms and Forests research program and has taught and conducted research at UC Berkeley and at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and has wide and deep experience in many aspects of food systems. And Dr. Anderson will start us off by setting the global context. Food production systems are very diverse, which is both a strength and a challenge if we want to move towards systems that are more efficient and more earth-friendly. So, Dr. Anderson, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Reinmar, and thanks everyone for being here. I think these conversations are so important to keep us all on the same page and kind of keep updating our understanding. And this is kind of right now what we're doing, I think, is really the backbone of civil society and the way we're going to make this world a better place and save what we have. So thank you all for being here and doing the work you do. I'm going to start sharing my slides if I can figure this out. So bear with me. Now, I hope you can just see the slide and not my notes.
Actually, we're seeing the left hand column of slides as well.
All right, that makes sense. I should start this slide.
There we go. Beautiful.
Okay. One more second. Ah, no, that is not. Okay, let me start sharing again. I apologize for this. Okay, how's that?
It's blank at the moment.
Oh,
There we
well,
go. Now we're
if we hadn't
seeing
done
your,
that,
now we are seeing your notes though.
okay, well, let's try this again.
There's a little note that says double click to get into the right screen. Is that what you're doing?
Um, let's see.
It was perfect during the
Okay,
rehearsal.
it was. We shouldn't have tried rehearsing. Beginner's luck. There, third time's a charm. Okay, sharing this.
Yeah, now it says double click to enter full screen mode.
Okay, but I wouldn't do it. Okay.
That
Okay.
looks good. Yep.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Um, so yeah, I'm Kate Anderson and I work with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I'm the director of their Food and Environment program. And I'll be just kind of setting the stage of where this global agriculture system is and how we got here and why we're kind of locked in and why it's so hard to change. Um, and maybe how, I'm going to talk a little bit about how UCS is trying to change things. So we're talking about climate tonight, and you may know that agriculture is responsible for about 10 or 11% of the United States greenhouse gas emissions. And this isn't necessarily carbon dioxide, it's more a couple of other greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxide. And methane is from enteric fermentation inside a cow's gut or other ruminant guts, and manure management, especially in an anaerobic environment. And the nitrous oxide is the second major agriculture greenhouse gas. And they're roughly the same proportion. And nitrous oxide is produced primarily from field emissions, from synthetic nitrogen fertilizer that's spread on fields, um, also during the manufacture of nitrogen fertilizer. And when you think about all the other aspects of the food system, then that 10% or 11% goes up because we have deforestation, food manufacturing and packaging, transportation, food waste. And globally, it's a similar proportion, but agriculture globally is a higher contributor to greenhouse gases for a number of different reasons. But they don't drive as many cars. The rest of the world doesn't drive as many cars or have as many other manufacturing emissions. Um, so I'm going to talk about four components of the industrial food system. Um, And so kind of a story of how we got locked into a hyper-industrial, hyper-concentrated food system where the ownership of the inputs are really concentrated. So from the beginning of the late 1800s, well, from the late 1800s, machinery was one of the big drivers of change in the food system and our unsustainability. Tillage, moldboard plows. What they do is they destroy the soil, they compact it, they turn it up, and that ruins the soil structure. And they take away all the plant roots that can kind of get air in and biological activity. And most of all, it depletes soil fertility and causes soil erosion. So that is a huge problem. And the way it's been solved is through synthetic fertilizers. After, the guano deposits and off the Peru coast and the islands ran out, the globe started racing to try to fix nitrogen from the air through an industrial process, and that was discovered in the early 1900s. But these synthetic fertilizers, as I was talking about, produce a lot of nitrous oxide, and they pollute the water. Nitrate in drinking water is a big problem for a few different health problems. Blue baby syndrome is kind of the poster child of nitrate pollution. And then when the nitrogen runs off the land, especially in the 13 states around the Mississippi River from all that corn production primarily, and other crops, it runs into the Mississippi River and flows down into the Gulf of Mexico, which is kind of the poster child for eutrophication from nitrogen fertilizer. And that's when nutrients cause a lot of plants to grow and decompose. And that kind of sucks all the oxygen out of the water. And so there's this giant dead zone where life can't, or organisms can't survive. And NOAA kind of measures it every year and announces how big it is this year in August, every August. And nitrogen fertilizer also kills earthworms and a lot of other beneficial nutrient cycling organisms. And so going back to machinery, when you have these machinery, you need a couple different things. You need to produce a lot of things to pay for the machinery, but you also need special seeds, and you need seeds that are genetically identical so that all of your corn and all of your crops mature at the same time and have identical heights and other characteristics so you can just mechanically harvest them. And also enormous yields, just like these new hybrid corns yield a lot of yields, and you're able to plant your corns rows very, very close together. And I keep talking about corn, but there's all the kinds, cotton, sorghum, soy, multiple commodity crops all have the same issues. But when you plant those rows so close together, it creates the perfect environment for insects, fungus, disease. And so then not only do you need a lot more fertilizer because you have a lot more plants in the same space, but you also need pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. And then, these are beneficial insects. And so then you need precision agriculture machinery. So it's this interlocking system of agriculture inputs. And the sociologists call it technological lock-in. And it's kind of a treadmill that farmers can't escape even if they want to. And so I've talked about how they're mutually dependent. You can't use pesticides without seeds. Oh, I didn't actually mention that. When you use these pesticides, it could maybe kill the herbicides, especially can kill the plants. So then you come up with GMO Roundup resistant seeds and things like that. So why are farmers trapped? Why, what is this lock-in? Well, besides all of the technology needing, like relying on each other. So if you want to just change your fertilizer regime, you can't just change that. You have to change your seeds, your machinery, and your pesticides. And so that's the technology lock-in. Makes it very, very difficult to change. When you have this kind of lock-in, one thing that keeps it in place is that the companies that manufacture this fertilizer, machinery, seeds, and pesticides, there's a lot of what we call horizontal integration, where they own multiple, like DuPont will manufacture not only pesticides, but then seeds, and Monsanto, which did seeds, now does pesticides. And so there's horizontal integration and then vertical integration along the production line. And that gives these companies incredible power, market power to buy up a lot of the competition. And that is really important. People talk about concentration in agriculture. And you just think, oh yeah, well, big is bad, but it's not, it's more than that. It's that it controls so much. When you have market power, for one thing, you don't have to keep innovating for the public good, making better products to some degree. You can simply innovate to maintain your market share, and you can buy up other companies to maintain your market share. And when you have oligopolies and monopolies, you can really influence prices and policies. And that's a really important. These kind of concentrated businesses not only can pay their lobbyists, but when they're so concentrated, policymakers just think, okay, well, that's agriculture. And so they don't even have to use lobbyists. They're just the face of agriculture. And so they're the voices that get heard. Unless folks like the Union of Concerned Scientists really organize diverse farmers, food chain workers, eaters. But it takes a lot of organization to overcome simply the kind of cultural reliance on these big companies. And so policy has been largely an accelerant of the hyper-industrial agriculture system. And U.S. government, so Project 2025, which is now kind of being followed with the current administration to some degree, they wanted to get government, well, the heritage document, wanted to get government out of agriculture. And then it would just function great. The free market would be wonderful. But government has always been in agriculture, starting with the facilitation of slave labor and the granting of occupied lands to white settlers. Even when the government tries to do good things, it often accelerates this input treadmill. So, for example, the 1933 Agricultural Adjustment Act, it was passed in order to curb production and raise prices and help dissipate eventually the depression. But it limited acreage. So the Adjustment Act said, farmers can only plant on so much acreage in order to decrease supply and increase prices. But what that did was it fueled the intensification and the dependence on industrial inputs because they needed to get more and more yield from smaller acreages. So it was trying to do a good thing, but then it had this collateral damage. And then a lot of government policy is explicitly like get big or get out, which is famous Secretary of Agriculture under Nixon and Ford, Earl Butz. So kind of explicitly passed policies and subsidies that would benefit large farmers. And it's not just a U.S. problem. We've exported these issues. This is a photograph in Mali, and there's kind of a very sad story that has stayed with me, where a seed company in Mali that was improving seeds and adapting them for local conditions, and had been for years, but not through hybridization, or obviously not through GMO. And the seeds were pretty good, but then an American corporation came in, charged very little for hybrid seeds, high yielding, these amazing Cadillac seeds, and drove the local seed company out of business. So now you don't have that kind of local autonomous control over your seed system. And with hybrid seeds, you actually need to buy them every single year because they terminate, or well, they don't terminate, but their genetics, they don't really work after the first year. So through a lot of different tactics, this model has been exported throughout the globe. And that's just one story. There's, Food for Peace, which was kind of an anti-communist program, and a ton of export subsidies. And I mean, it's definitely been exported throughout the globe. This is just another picture. This is India, kind of a success story. In 2021 or 2020, the government of India passed a law that was a series of laws, like three main laws to concentrate agriculture. And a lot of it was driven by the desire to further industrialize the country. But this is a photograph of farmer protests. And farmer protests were widespread in India. It was kind of amazing. And the Supreme Court ended up suspending these laws. So you don't see a lot of successes, but that was at least a modest success as far as I know. I'm not sure what happened since then. Maybe I'm giving you old news. Um, so anyway, so we've understood this problem for decades. Not only does it cause climate emissions, but water quality that I talked about, um, and then biodiversity. You have these giant monocropped fields, and that's to maximize your machinery, and so you don't have any hedgerows, you don't have any habitat for beneficial insects. It's just it's a terrible system of agriculture for the environment. Um, and here I'll just well, I'll do in a second. So so the Food and Environment Program, I believe we need a fundamental shift to an agroecological system that's based less in profit and more in ecosystems, understanding ecosystems, and using the concept of all the different parts of ecosystems to produce food sustainably, and produce healthy food. And another thing about agroecology, it's not just practices like cover crops. So cover crops is one thing you can do within an industrial food system to reduce soil erosion, perhaps capture a little bit more carbon, um, things like that, and improve your soil fertility. But it's not a system change, it's a practice change within the current system. And those are great. We need all the practice changes we can get. But what we ultimately need is a system change that will break up that interlock of those four types of inputs. Oh yeah, so what was this that we're looking at? So this is a picture of those 13 states feeding into the Gulf of Mexico, and here's the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that I talked about before. Um, so another aspect of agroecology, it's a little bit different from what's popularly considered like regenerative agriculture. And regenerative agriculture talks a lot about the soil, whereas agroecology is more explicitly political and systemic. And it centers farmers and food workers and communities. So the Unit of Concerned Scientists, what do we do? So the Food and Environment Program has three components. We do a lot of research well, we try to pass policies. That's most of what we do. We try to use federal policymaking to improve the farm system. It's just one part of the picture, and we need activists, we need farmers, we really need local food systems. But we're focusing on this piece of the puzzle, which is passing federal policies that kind of hopefully enable a lot of the other activities. And so when we hit a bump in the road towards passing a policy and we don't really have any information, then we do research. We have a lot of like just hard science researchers who publish research. And we organize. We organize especially scientists. We have 20,000 scientists members. We have about 300 layperson members. So I hope you all become a member. But our organizing model is wonderful. I think it's called relational organizing. So instead of just having the UCS talk to different people, say, hey, send an email to your congressperson. We have UCS then works with a scientist in a lab, and then they train those scientists then to go ahead and organize other people. And relational organizing, one of the meanings of that is about relationships, because people are not going to continue working together, continue lobbying their congresspeople, unless there's kind of some friendship there. And so we try to kind of create a family vibe that really gives back and creates an identity and a home for people that in a lot of ways is kind of missing in society for some people who are a little bit isolated and lonely. So we kind of take that science and bring it into organizing. And here's just a screenshot of a Zoom call where we were training scientists how to organize. Um, and in this case, visit a government policy and government affairs division. Greta Thunberg with one of our climate scientists. Kind of more fun pictures. This is recent pictures from some Stand Up for Science marches. Well, let's see. This is going to be too many. Whoop. Okay, so what do we do? So I'm going to talk about just real briefly 3 things we're doing. One is called the Transformational Farm Bill, and we created a coalition through, we got a lot of funding for grassroots groups, BIPOC groups in particular, to try to change the face of agriculture by literally changing the face of who's in power, who's having these conversations and making these decisions. And that was a huge success, and we organized a lot of grassroots frontline groups, but then in 2023, the Farm Bill was not passed. And then in 2024, again, the Farm Bill was not passed. And it looks like there won't be another Farm Bill this year. So all that work, it got us ready for the moment, but then that moment never came. And so that's what nonprofit civil society work is like. You create the conditions, but you have to have that moment. And we were hoping for. So it was a success story that didn't actually work yet, but we have all those marker bills and we have all those relationships. So hopefully in 2027 or 2029, we can get a transformational farm bill. Let's see, another piece of work that we're working on. Oh, this is just a transformational farm bill call. So another piece of legislation we're working on is called conservation compliance. And if you think back to that dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, for years, we've been trying to shrink the dead zone. And, Bill Clinton, I think, 1995, was the first president to say, make it a priority. But it hasn't gone away. It hasn't shrunk at all. And so we keep writing about it, but nothing happens. And the policy that we're currently using to shrink the dead zone is paying farmers for voluntary conservation practices like cover crops or using less nitrogen fertilizer. And so UCS, Union of Concerned Scientists, says, okay, that's not working. We need to pass the regulations. And regulations are political. It's kind of what we call a third rail, or politically very difficult, if not infeasible. Or so it has been. So we want to try to link regulations, not a regulation, but link incentive to implement conservation practices to other government support that you're getting, like other subsidies. So most farmers get some kind of government support subsidies, whether it's, subsidized crop insurance or subsidized loan or disaster support, or, there's so many different programs. So conservation compliance policy would condition receiving any government support on implementing a conservation plan on your farm and then executing it. So that's kind of an example of the kinds of things that we were doing. So we're doing research on what that would look like, how it would affect small farmers, because we really want to look at the whole system and come up with a strategy to get it passed. So that is a little bit about UCS and the problem of interlocking industrial agriculture system. And so thank you so very much. And I'm going to leave you for a second with this QR code if you want to take a shot. And it's to recruit for our science network. So it is only for scientists, but if there's some scientists out there, we welcome you to join us. And for non-scientists, we welcome you to go to our webpage and join our membership there. So thanks again very much, and I'll stop sharing.
Great, thank you, Dr. Kate Anderson. Very interesting. Now we've got some questions coming in, but I think what we'll do is we'll hold on to them till the end so that we don't delay their speakers, our next speakers. But Those in the audience, please do put your questions, whatever you're curious about, put that into the chat, and we will hopefully get to as many of them as we can. Now, meanwhile, I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Julie Davenson. Julie works with farms across the country, transitioning to regenerative and organic farming systems, and she's an advocate for organic farming and soil health. She's worked on various farms in food businesses, was a lead author for the Sustainable Production Systems issue brief of the New Hampshire Food Alliance's Strategic Plan for Food and Agriculture in New Hampshire, which was recently published and is going to have its official launch on May 21st, and more on that at the very end of this event. It's an upcoming attraction. Julie Davenson is Director of Program Integration and Financial Services at the Soil and Climate Initiative. She's also board president at the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New Hampshire and is currently research assistant at the Institute for Agroecology of the University of Vermont, where she's supporting research on regional food system governance. Now, working with NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, Julie has long been at the center of efforts to strengthen and to reform agriculture in New Hampshire and in New England, and she will give us a little bit of insight into those efforts. Julie Davenson. Looks great. Oh, Julie, you're on mute still.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's perfect. Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everybody. So I'd like to start tonight just with an important statistic, taking it down to the New Hampshire level. Today, only about 3% of the food we consume in New Hampshire is produced within our state borders. So think about that for a moment. For every 100 meals eaten in the Granite State, only 3 come from our own farms and fields. The other 97 meals traveled hundreds or even maybe thousands of miles to reach our plates, often produced in the systems that Karen was just showing us. So this extraordinary level of import dependency isn't just a New Hampshire problem. It's a problem across New England, where we currently only produce 12% of the food we consume in the region, despite having the capacity to produce much more. This dependency creates multiple vulnerabilities. Many of us saw that with the pandemic. We're seeing it even in the case of bird flu and access to eggs. It weakens our food security. It drains our regional economy, contributes significantly to climate change, and not only through transportation emissions, but through reliance on industrial agriculture methods that deplete soil health, pollute the waterways, as we just saw, and also reduce the nutrient density of our food. There are many studies showing that you would have to eat, let's say, the equivalent of 8 oranges today to get the nutrient density of 1 orange that maybe your grandfather would have eaten. I don't know if a lot of those statistics are still on the USDA website. They were at one point, but there are a lot of other groups now also correlating agricultural practices and soil health with the nutrient density in our food. But today I'm going to focus on 3 critical aspects of building a more sustainable and resilient food system in New Hampshire and New England. First, I want to discuss soil health as a foundation for agricultural sustainability, showing how diverse ecological farming practices can help restore degraded soils. Second, I'll explore how properly integrating animals into farming systems can help complete natural nutrient cycles. We saw a lot about inputs and the impact on our system. And so we'll talk about how working closed loop cycles can help get us out of some of the systems that we're stuck in. And then third, we'll examine how regional food systems approaches can strengthen our climate resilience while supporting our local economy. And throughout, I'll be pointing to local examples, including indigenous wisdom, modern ecological research, and practical examples that demonstrate these principles. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So import dependency and food miles. So if we take a closer look at our current food system and why local production matters, as I mentioned, we only produce 12% of our food in New England, despite having the capacity for more. It wasn't always the case. In the 1800s, up to 90% of New England food was produced within the region. But then the shift to global supply chains that happened gradually over the decades and then accelerated since World War II was supported by policies that favored large-scale industrial agriculture over local diversified farming. And then research currently by New England Feeding New England, it's a regional partnership project, indicated that with proper investments in regional food systems, New England could achieve up to 30% food self-sufficiency by 2030. And they have a whole plan that you can read that talks about their research and initial ideas for getting there. This isn't just an aspirational goal, though. New England could achieve this, and it's essential for our regional resilience. Let's see. So, and every percentage point we move towards self-sufficiency represents millions of dollars that are staying in our local economies and thousands of tons of carbon emissions avoided. But the issue goes beyond simply where our food is grown. It's also about how it's grown and the ecological cycles that sustain our food systems. So it's also about governance and control of these food systems, ensuring decision-making and revenue is generated and stays within our communities. Throughout human history, agriculture has been based on nutrient cycling until we had the onset of industrial agriculture. And that was just laid out beautifully in the last presentation. And we must remember that what's taken from the soil must be returned to maintain that fertility. And traditional farming systems understood this intuitively. Historically, cultivation of crops was integrated with animals, and they created a closed loop system where animals provided the power, the fertilizer, and food while consuming crop residues and maintaining pastures. And that symbiotic relationship sustained farming communities for hundreds, if not, millennia. And in the mid-20th century, we saw how this balance was disrupted, beginning also in the 1950s with poultry concentration. Then that concentration expanded to beef and pork in the 1960s. So animals were removed from diversified farms and concentrated in industrial facilities. And so this separation created a cascading ecological and ethical problems. Nutrients began being imported through synthetic fertilizers. Farmland became depleted as less organic matter was returning to the soil. And a lot of these inputs are just treating the chemical properties of the soil. So when you remove the biology, you're removing a lot of the diversity of the soil that's essential. And then concentrated feeding operations created pollution hotspots, as we saw. The disconnection of crops and livestock broke crucial nutrient cycles. So now when we ship in fertilizers produced overseas to grow crops, which are then harvested and consumed, with nutrients eventually flowing out to the sea, we're operating in an open loop system that inevitably depletes our soils and causes lots of water pollution. So the key to sustainable agriculture isn't eliminating animals, it's about properly integrating them to complete natural nutrient cycles. So I'm going to just go here to the next slide. So soil health as a foundation. It's not just dirt, but it is a living ecosystem beneath our feet that makes all agriculture possible. Soil health goes beyond basic fertility to include factors like soil structure, compaction, microbial diversity, organic matter content, and stability. Across different ecological farming approaches, whether organic, biodynamic, permaculture, or agroecology, the 5 principles of soil health emerge as fundamental. The first principle is minimize soil disturbance. We see many regenerative farms talking about no-till systems where they're not tilling up and turning the dirt. Also compaction, a lot of heavy equipment, heavily impacts or overstocking animals and never rotating them or moving them can cause a lot of compaction as well. Second, we must keep the soil covered. Nature abhors bare soil. If you ever look at a patch in your garden that's left uncovered, you will see weeds quickly move in to cover it. So cover crops, mulch, and living plant communities protect soil from erosion, and they also support soil life. Third principle is maximize diversity above and below ground. So monocultures are rare in nature and for a good reason. Diverse plant and animal communities create resilience and multiple pathways for nutrient cycling. Fourth principle, maintain living roots in the soil as much as possible year-round. These roots feed the soil organisms through exudates, and they prevent soil erosion and nutrient leaching. Incorporating perennial shrubs and crops are helpful in achieving this goal. That's why you may see and hear a lot about agroforestry these days. We're adding more perennials into the system. We're bringing nature back into agriculture as opposed to pushing it out. And fifth, thoughtfully integrating animals. So whether through managed grazing, adaptive grazing systems, or utilizing farm animals to process crop residues, animals play a crucial role in healthy agro-ecosystems. I was talking to a farmer that is on the border of Nebraska and Kansas today, and he was talking about how he was able to bring his farmland back to life and improve the soil, and he used animals on his farm as a tool to do that. The farm had received plenty of synthetic input and fertilizers over the years, but the soil biology was dead. And he brought that back to life and brought biology back to the soil through animal integration. And it's thoughtful, careful in animal integration. It's not the types of animal systems we see with concentrated animal feeding units. So farmers implementing these principles are seeing tangible results. They do, once they're reconditioned the soil, they are able to see, higher crop yields with fewer inputs, better water infiltration, improved drought resistance, and more nutrient-dense foods. So, and then I also just want to talk for a minute, the labels that we apply to these approaches, whether they're organic, permaculture, biodynamic, agroecological, matter less than the ecological principles being followed. There's a lot of semantics getting caught up in organic, regenerative, and we want to look at what are the outcomes, and each systems offer valuable insights and techniques, and many of the most successful farms will draw from a variety of these traditions, but fundamentally they're all rooted in soil health. Although with the exception, as Kate had pointed out, that agroecology extends further to include social and economic justice, and that's critically important in a sustainable system as well. Go on here. So slide 6, so organic agriculture, and here NOFA New Hampshire is one of the pioneering organizations in organic agriculture. The organization will be 54 years old this year, and I remember that because it was born the same year I was born. And so they provide a variety of programs to support farmers in the state. Here you'll see some pictures from our craft tour and the craft of farming, where we visit different farms throughout the states and do tours, and the farmers will share what their practices are, how they're growing, and it's just a great experience, whether you're an eater, home gardener, or farmer, to learn, share, meet other people, and celebrate the state's farming heritage. So organic agriculture has pioneered important work in reducing synthetic inputs and building soil biology. And let's see, and yeah, so that's one thing. And then permaculture is another approach to farming that offers a lot of sophisticated design principles for creating integrated systems as well. Again, bringing more of nature in. Biodynamic farming brings a holistic perspective on farm organisms, as well as rhythm and seasonal timing. And then agroecology applies ecological principles to agricultural landscapes. So what matters isn't which label we adopt so much as how effectively farming approaches close those nutrient loops and build soil organic matter, support diversity both above and below ground, and produce nutritious food without depleting resources that future generations will need. Our focus should be on measuring tangible ecological outcomes and supporting the farmers that demonstrate continuous improvement towards truly sustainable systems. So research shows these ecological approaches do deliver real climate benefits. Diverse cropping systems, cover crops, integrated animal systems all enhance soil health while sequestering carbon. And by building soil organic matter, these practices strengthen the cycling of carbon, water, nitrogen, and phosphorus, sulfur, and other elements, creating more resilient farm systems while mitigating climate change. And let's see. So I have already talked a little about animal integration. I'll just expand on that a little bit more. That's my goat troubles. At my house here, we have animals that help us manage brush, and they're pets as well. But there's a common misconception that animal agriculture is inherently unsustainable, and the reality is a little bit more nuanced. How animals are raised matters enormously, and when they're integrated in diverse farming systems, they provide multiple ecological benefits. Like I mentioned, they can improve nutrient cycling as their manure enriches the soils and promotes microbial diversity. And as they move across pastures, their hoofs incorporate plant material and manure into the soil, helping to build topsoil and maintain soil health. So these integrated approaches stand in stark contrast to industrial animal agriculture production. While industrial systems are linear, inputs become food and waste, and ecological farming is cyclical, where today's outputs becomes tomorrow's inputs. And this also helps farmers save a lot of money as opposed to purchasing fertilizer from far away like Ukraine. We're seeing a lot of farmers now realizing the benefits of these systems and developing inputs on farm, and animal integration is an important piece of that. So in New Hampshire, with our mix of prime farmland and more marginal areas suitable for mainly grazing, integrated animal systems make ecological and economic sense, and they allow us to produce high quality protein while building soil health and maintaining open landscapes that support diversity and rural character. Now I'm going to transition to regional food systems and climate resilience. So I want to consider how strengthening our regional food system can directly address climate challenges while building economic resilience. So regional food systems significantly reduce food miles, the distance food travels from production to consumption. With approximately 88% of New England food currently imported from outside the region, localizing food production can sustainably decrease transported greenhouse gas emissions. Studies also suggest a robust regional food system could reduce these emissions by up to 20 to 25% compared to our current globalized model. So beyond transportation benefits, regional systems can also prioritize ecological agricultural practices that sequester carbon in the soil, provide cover cropping, perennial agriculture like orchards, berries, silvopastures, maintain year-round carbon capture, and reducing tillage preserves soil structure, keeps that carbon locked in the ground. So diversified regional farms typically grow multiple crops varieties, creating redundancies if certain crops fail. So we have multiple farms growing multiple types of crops. Shorter supply chains are less vulnerable to climate-related transportation disruptions, and regional processing and storage facilities create food reserves closer to population centers. And the knowledge of local growing conditions help farmers adapt more quickly to the changing climate patterns. So New England's extensive forests serve as critical carbon sinks, and a stronger regional food system can protect these forests by revitalizing existing farmland rather than clearing new land, and implementing agroforestry approaches that integrate trees within agricultural systems, creating economic incentives to maintain working forests alongside agriculture. So regional food systems typically generate less food waste, addressing another major climate concern. Shorter supply chains mean less spoilage during transport. Direct-to-consumer sales reduce cosmetic standards that lead to waste, and regional processing facilities can transform seconds into value-added products. Community connections facilitate food rescue programs and composting initiatives. So by developing stronger regional food systems, New England can create a more climate resilient approach to feeding its population while reducing its carbon footprint and preserving its natural resources for future generations. I will also add, it's also a myth that large farm feeds the world, small farms feed the world, and there are many statistics to prove that. In the past 7 years, we have seen a number of state and regional food system plans emerging, providing recommendations on policies and programs to support the development of more just, equitable, and sustainable food system. As I mentioned earlier, the New England State Food System Partnership Plan has a general plan as well as state level plans. We've seen New England Feeding New England, their 20 by 30 goal, producing 30% of the food in the region by 2030. Food Solutions New England in 2014 produced a New England food vision where they imagined 50% of their food produced in the region by 2060. And each of these plans lay out various recommendations and ideas for approaching that. And then there are many state plans that have been revealed in the past, several years. And as at the beginning of this webinar, we mentioned that the New Hampshire Food Alliance just launched their state plan. So I would encourage you all to take a look at it. And I know that the New Hampshire Food Alliance will be rolling out a series of events to get the public further engaged in this. So one thing to note, and I think Kate spoke to it as well, we have a highly consolidated food system that makes implementation a challenge, as well as consumer preference for uniformity. We're used to products looking the same, but in reality, when you're growing in these sustainable systems, a carrot may be bent at times, a tomato may not look perfect, and that's something that as consumers we can do is learn to embrace imperfection and the beauty of food in all of its forms. And it's also important to lift up not just the state directed plans, but also the numerous grassroots visions for how we can imagine food production, and also changing our approaches to land stewardship. One regional project I want to mention is the Land Care Cooperative. And this approach is working on restoring watersheds. They're working on farms, mainly perennial pasture systems, to integrate more biodiversity. They are using some sophisticated technology and science to give them immediate feedback on how the landscape is responding. And this is going to not only produce healthy food for their community, but also help mitigate the flooding that has been prevalent in the region. And they've also come together to form a cooperative. So these are farmers providing this service to their community as well as food, and doing it on their own terms, as opposed to, participating in carbon market programs where we have corporations that are paying for tax credits to offset emissions in their supply chain, and by getting credit through another project that's doing it. So another regional project is with the, let me go here, the White River Conservation District called Farm Force, and they've set out to mobilize people, and they've planted, I think it was well over 500 trees last year. They're focusing on grazing and agroforestry cohort, and also reintroducing hickory and a hickory oil process to produce more cooking oils in our region. Then there is the Abenaki Land Link project, where, let's see, the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont, the Abenaki Nation, and they work together to connect indigenous communities with farmers who dedicate land to grow traditional crops. And so they're ensuring the preservation of important crops that are available. And then last, I'd like to point to in developing stronger regional food systems, we can draw tremendous inspiration from the indigenous people who have stewarded New England's lands for thousands of years. Their sophisticated food systems offer proven models of sustainability and resilience. The Abenaki and other indigenous people of the region cultivated the Three Sister Gardens. I'm sure many of you heard of that, interplanting corn and beans and squash as companion plants. This system represents one of the earliest and most sophisticated examples of sustainable agriculture and demonstrating principles directly relevant to modern ecological farming. And let's see, indigenous food systems also recognize the importance of seasonal eating and food preservation. The Abenaki people lived with the rhythm of the seasonal cycles, which guided them when to harvest wild foods and to plant crops. And they were skilled at harvesting and preserving diverse food, including fish, game, nuts, berries, and maple sap. So modern regional food systems can adopt a similar approach through seasonal farming operations, eating more seasonally, revitalizing traditional food preservation methods, and creating food calendars and developing appropriate season extension infrastructure. Let's see, and then indigenous food systems also recognize that all land, air, water, and soil are culturally important. Plant, animal, and fungi species are interconnected parts of a whole system that ideally function in healthy interdependent relationships. And it's that holistic approach that contrasts sharply with today's compartmentalized industrialized food system and offers a model for watershed-based planning and integrated land management. So a path forward for New Hampshire. And this is from one of the greenhouses where on a farm that I worked, where we were bringing in a variety of herbs and flowers like into the high tunnels to add diversity and bring in beneficial insects. So another visual example of how you can bring more of nature into agriculture. So our path forward, as we've discussed today, New Hampshire has an opportunity to transform its food system from one that relies on imports for 97% of its food to one that's more self-sufficient, resilient, and environmentally sound. So some key insights I hope you'll take away. First, soil health is fundamental. By focusing on ecological practices that build soil organic matter and support microbial communities, we can create the foundation for sustainable food production. Second, animals are essential partners when properly integrated. Rather than viewing animals as a problem, we need to recognize their crucial role in nutrient cycling when thoughtfully incorporated into agricultural systems. And third, systems thinking must replace false dichotomies. So the debates between plant-based and animal agriculture, organic, regenerative, it distracts us from the real challenge of building like closed loop systems where nutrients are cycling efficiently rather than being imported and exported across global supply chains. And then fourth, economic opportunity awaits. Research shows that farms transitioning to integrated ecological practices can increase profitability while reducing environmental impacts. I talk to farmers about this impact daily. And with robust local market access was important, and consumer support over industrial consumer packaged goods that we often see in the supermarket, that are produced by huge multinational corporations, we can support our small farms in the region in achieving this goal. And then fifth, regional resilience is global resilience. So as climate change threatens food systems worldwide, strong regional food networks provide security not just for New Englanders, but contribute to a more stable food system. So the path forward requires multiple approaches, supporting farmers in transitioning to sustainable practices through education, policy, and financial incentives. The EQIP program at the USDA was really important for a lot of our regional farmers, and hopefully that will continue to be funded. But that was like a key source of funding to support farmers who were implementing conservation-based practices on their farm. Developing regional processing and distribution infrastructure is key and critical to us rebuilding our regional food system. Encouraging consumers to reconnect with local food systems, buying directly from farms whenever possible, and advancing the research, especially farmer-led research on practices specific to our region need, and supporting farmers financially, and creating new market access. There was a bill that we introduced, House Bill 156, that would establish a committee to explore the implementation of incentives for retailers and institutions to buy more from local farms. Farmers need markets to stay in business. So let's see. So as we face a growing population and escalating climate changes, New Hampshire can be a model, and should, for how small states can build food sovereignty while contributing to environmental solutions. So in closing, I would invite you to reimagine our relationship with food, not just as consumers of anonymous global commodities, but as participants in a regional food system that nourishes our bodies, our souls, our economies, and our communities. And sunchokes. I'm really excited about sunchokes these days. They grow like weeds and they're highly nutritious, so check them out. Great crop you can throw in anywhere. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to the next speaker.
All right, thank you very much, Julie Davenson. Awesome insights, very nice. Yeah, so lots of questions, but we will forge ahead and hopefully have time at the end. Our next speaker is Dr. Julie Snorek, who's a practitioner, researcher, and instructor of social ecological systems transitions. Very critical. How are we going to transition our systems from one thing into another? Dr. Snorek has led research for transdisciplinary programs on behalf of Dartmouth College, at the United Nations University, for USAID, and several large NGOs internationally. After 6 years studying farming and rangeland systems in West Africa, Dr. Snorek completed her doctorate in environmental science and technology from the University of Barcelona in Spain, and then returned home to Vermont and began studying agricultural transitions with farmers in her community, which culminated in a 3-year National Science Foundation grant to study how farmers, business leaders, and soil health advocates are imagining regenerative farming futures, exactly what Julie Davenson was just describing. So Dr. Snorek is going to tell us about regenerative agriculture practices and theory, and what are they? How can we move societies more toward them? Dr. Snorek.
Thanks. Really nice to see everyone here. And because I'm a researcher, I'm going to start off by asking you all questions. So I'm putting in the chat 4 questions that I would love your responses on. Just to see who's in the room. I know one person at least, Dottie Smith, is in the room. Nice to see you, Dottie. So this is a primer on Regen Ag, but I wanted to really bring in the perspective of policy. I'm currently an American Associate for the Advancement of Science and Technology Policy Fellow. And through that work, I've been thinking a lot about how we are conceptualizing regenerative agriculture for making policy on it, and what does that then translate to? So this term, regenerative agriculture, and what it means and why it's important now is kind of where I'm going to come from. But I also have been doing a lot of research talking to farmers about how they think about regenerative agriculture, why they think it's important, what their philosophies of it are. So the origins of regenerative agriculture come from the Rodale Institute. And they defined it as a form of agriculture that leads to increasing levels of productivity, increases our land and soil biological production base, provides a productive contribution of increasingly large numbers of people to transition towards minimal reliance on non-renewable resources. So for those of you who are answering the question, what is regenerative food? You can maybe use this definition, but I would love to hear what you think regeneratively grown food is. There's a lot of different drivers for this, from the soil health crisis to climate change, biodiversity losses. I'm not going to go into these into detail because I think we already spoke a little bit about the why, what's happening in industrial ag and why we got here. Rather, I want to talk a little bit about the different ways people are imagining and using this idea of regenerative across the global sphere. So from ecosystem restoration programs, this is the decade of ecosystem restoration. The program that's focusing on the Coalition to Improve Soil Health, which is an international program. The COP28, the Conference of Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was 2 years ago. They had a huge agenda in Dubai on regenerative agriculture, leading to a lot of financial organizations, especially ESG funding, environmental, social, and governance focused investment dollars flowing towards regenerative agriculture. And then the US Department of Agriculture opened the G20 with focus on sustainable ag, including the term regenerative. How do we regenerate in a sustainable manner? So this term has been circulating quite a lot. And what does that mean for us at the local scale? Well, we buy food from the agribusiness industry. The agribusiness industry is making vast promises to transition acres to the sustainable regenerative supply chain across the country, across the world. Everyone from Walmart to Nestle to Cargill are doing this. And what that essentially means, and Julie is involved in some of this work as I was carrying out research on this work, is a lot of large scale farmers with thousands of acres are signing up their acreage so that they're planting, taking on one or more of these practices in a list of 5 practices, cover cropping or integrating livestock or otherwise, to try to become regenerative. But as far as how that's measured and what the outcomes are of that, there's a lot of diversity as to how that's being measured and what that looks like. So these different frameworks have emerged to try to get a handle on that. What is the way that we need to measure and understand if we're actually regenerating, from the farm scale with the Regen 10, the Meridian Institute, the Sustainable Agricultural Initiative, Regenerating Together framework, and then the One Planet for Business and Biodiversity, which is a very interesting framework. I'm not going to go into these, but they're interesting to look up and see how is it that these large conglomerates, especially I think OP2B's approach, how they're influencing business and agribusiness and otherwise to determine what's regenerative. The other aspect is that there's some certifications that are now in play. They're being, you can seed the food that's certified by the Soil Climate and Health Initiative, the Regenerative Organic Alliance, in stores now. You can buy this food, maybe some of you have already, and in Whole Foods, for instance, sells very often. And these are standards that have been developed with various different indicators to say, look, we're regenerating the soil, look, we're regenerating society as well. The Regen Organic Alliance includes social indicators in their certification. So what regenerative agriculture is not, is I would say it's not just a marketing trend, even though you do see a lot of that going on. It's not a new idea. This is something indigenous tribes practiced for millennia to maintain the soil, the forest, and the landscape in ways that would keep things in high quality, to have a food system that perpetuated. And it's not a prescription. There's no singular approach to regeneration. There's multiple different approaches that allow us to regenerate the land. And again, we talked about the 5 principles. There's also kind of this philosophy that's more this circular system-based philosophy. And I think that's what a lot of the 3 of us are advocating today, is that we need to think about how do we not just regenerate soil and the 5 principles of soil health, but think about the financial stability, social cohesion, human health, atmospheric health, land and water, and production abundance, all of the aspects of the system. Yeah. So the USDA, while they don't have a singular definition of regenerative agriculture, there's several different frameworks that have emerged that are relevant. Sustainable agriculture is one, which focuses on kind of satisfying human needs, environmental quality, natural resources, maintaining those, sustaining economic viability, integrating biological cycles, enhancing the quality of life of farmers and society, and efficiently using non-renewable resources. A lot of these aren't necessarily measurable within the context of sustainable agriculture. There are programs in the National Resource Conservation Service that will give funds to farmers who are carrying out certain sustainable ag practices. And if they are doing those practices, then they can receive some kind of support or money. There's lots of different programs for that, like our CPP. But again, sustainable agriculture isn't something that we have trademarked like organic and said, you can certify something as sustainable. Climate smart agriculture is something that emerged, I would say, during the last administration under Vilsack very strongly, because there was a huge amount of money, I think $3 or $4 billion that was put towards a commodity, setting commodities for climate smart agriculture. That has all been recently revoked. All of the funding is now in question based on whether or not the money is serving farmers directly. But the idea was to establish a set of commodities that could be shown to be climate smart. And this is also very relevant to regenerative agriculture because of its focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions through environmental changes in farming. Agroecology is kind of just a philosophy that is spoken about at the USDA. I can't say it's something that they've put into programs specifically for agroecology. I'm not aware of them, at least. I'm gonna skip this. So this has now been taken down, unfortunately, but since I made this presentation, but there were a long list of climate smart agriculture and forestry mitigation activities that farmers could turn to and say, okay, how do we do this? What's the process? And that list then laid out, here's how you benefit ecosystems better. Here's the practices that you can do. So this was a really helpful resource, again, no longer available. So I want to talk a little bit about alternative pathways, like what are some inclusive ways that we can move forward? Because we've talked a little bit about the social side of regenerative agriculture, and some of my research has focused more on that. So regeneration, if we think about regenerating the soil, there's also other aspects that happen in tandem. You have to use a more diversity of seeds, livestock, and all these practices really shift how people are thinking about the land. So in many ways, there's programs that are being established, like in Kansas and Nebraska, the Iowa tribe has started to educate people about regenerative agriculture through different programs. They also are practicing it on their land, on their reservation. The Maya Regeneration Project is doing the same thing in Omaha. They're doing it in a city, urban agriculture standpoint, and growing seeds that you don't necessarily find in the local stores, and bringing those back and then sharing them. There's a lot of other programs that exist, but these are just a few that I've encountered. And I want to talk about some cases of farms in New England and Vermont predominantly, where specifically farmers are just have started to take this idea of how do we regenerate society in a way that will allow all to access food in different ways. And many of those are focused on community-oriented farms, bringing the community back to the land and having people interact with the land and with food production systems. So that was why I asked the question, how many of you produce food? Because really all of us, I think, are a part of this in our choices. So this is one, Kendra Giant Journey Farm in Newfane, Vermont. Their focus is really having an equitable community commons on their land and making food accessible and affordable for everyone. Another is a community farm. They asked not to include their name, but they're located in southern Vermont. And they're a cooperative community farm with a vision of really focusing on Afro-Indigenous connection to the land, reconnection, rebuilding of those connections. Slavery took a very big toll, especially on African-American communities, as creating a disconnect between the land once slavery was abolished and the belief that, slavery and working the land were connected. So what they're trying to do is heal those lost connections to the land and food production systems through their work. And I think the implication of that is really understanding that we have to be very intentional in how we think about who are the people that we're serving within the movement towards reconnecting our food systems. And essentially the concept that I feel draws us together is that we're regenerating our social mycelia. And so the mycelia is something within the soil that communicates between trees and plants, what's happening. And it's a system of fungi that allow that communication to really promote plants to protect one another. And so in the social elements of regenerative agriculture, we need to build systems that are more inclusive, accessible, and that really think about how do we resolve ecological damage in ways that build more justice, structural justice for everyone. And so an integral part of this process is rebuilding those connections with each other. So groups like this, I think, are really essential in getting to know each other, inviting one another to eat the food that we're growing, learning about how we're growing food. I think all these things are really helpful to regenerate the social mycelium and, the land, essentially. So the pathway and the theory that I've been developing, similar to what others have presented, is that we need to change systemically how we are understanding change, social change, and regeneration. So one of those is not just looking for quantitative, yield-based, carbon-based regeneration, but also qualitative regeneration and valuing the qualitative benefits. We need to understand diversity, what that means, and how to support diversity in our social and biological systems, and really provide indicators as to why we see that as essential in order to have better food systems and to regenerate. We need to relocalize our food production systems, the processing, the composting, et cetera, of those systems. And then build more healthy systems so that we can have a pharmacy as food as medicine. This is something that's being talked a lot about in policy arenas. And I know with the new head of the HHS, we're thinking more about food as medicine. But really the idea of this is just, growing food in ways that provides a better nutrient balance to people, creates more accessibility to healthy food, and, really makes food available to everyone who needs food. Stewardship, recognizing that humans are the stewards of the land, and showing that, that work, that labor is valuable. And figuring out a program that would be better than the payments for ecosystem services, which has had a lot of problems and has excluded a lot of people from those discussions, even in Vermont, where they've had some practice with that. So figuring out what are some compensation schemes that are just, what are ways that we can make them based on outcomes. And that's a discussion that maybe groups like this can have and try to figure out the answer to those questions. I know Julie Davenson and I with the Northeast Healthy Soils Network talk a lot about how do we do that. And then think about our farmers. Farmers have one of the top suicide rates in the country. And so we really need to address, how do we support farmers better? How do we find ways to make the lives and livelihoods of farmers better? And then, I'm not an activist myself directly. I'm more of a researcher, but the other two in this call really are doing this kind of radical action, farming as a radical action and direct action, and really recognizing the need to continue to reach out to policymakers and ask for what we need and what. So that's all I have for you. I hope we have a lot of discussion. I tried to go quickly so we would have time for that. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Snorek, Dr. Julie Snorek. Very nice on regenerative agriculture in general. Great. Now, folks listening, I'm sure there are more questions than have been entered into the chat, but there are some there, and I'm going to start off, if I could, by asking about one thing that's always been in my mind. I have some experience working in India. Productivity is a big issue, and I want to know what you all think about the question of whether regenerative agriculture or organic agriculture, the various forms that we've been talking about, can they be as productive? And uh, that's a controversy among academics. What do you guys think about that issue?
Well, I suppose it depends how it's being measured, right? So when we talk in terms of productivity, if we're looking at like the whole system, how productive are our current systems that rely on inputs coming, from across the world, seeds, we're losing seed diversity. So I think it's all in how you measure it. And I would say that and argue that organic systems are inevitably more productive because they're inherently more sustainable. But that's a succinct answer. I know there's a lot to dissect there, but yeah.
Mhm.
I too wondered about productivity, and just the scale of doing this. I mean, I can see it being possible to have a small farming follow a lot of these concerns, but I wonder about large scale.
Well, a farmer I was talking to today is probably what you would consider large scale growing, typical corn, soy, wheat rotations, has integrated animal agriculture and other regenerative practices in his system. And what he notes is that during droughts, normally where the crops would just dry out, they're able to withstand droughts. And so I think we need to look at it in terms of like our changing climate context too. So these systems are not that we think are more productive are not resilient in the face of the extreme weather patterns that we're experiencing. And they're not resilient without adding more and more fertilizer into the system. When your soil biology is dead, it's not producing, and it's not producing without adding costly inputs, and that is putting farmers out of business. So I would argue for those reasons and many more that those systems are not productive, that's a false narrative that we've been led to believe.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think before that answer, you might try to give kind of a false answer, which is, or an interesting framing, which is ecosystem productivity is measured by carbon cycling. And so like, technically speaking from that perspective, you're producing a lot more, you're photosynthesizing a lot more. But is that really what the measurement of productivity is? Like how much we're photosynthesizing and turning into so I think that Julie's measures of productivity are more interesting and important.
So, in other words, the question of productivity has a lot to do with how you're interpreting that word and the systems that you set up to measure and compare productivity across different systems. Yeah. Great. Let's see, other questions here. Anybody else see any questions we need to get to? John Gage, have you seen anything?
I was
I haven't been able to.
noticing, oh, sorry. I was
Go
just
ahead,
noticing
go
the
ahead.
question on GMOs that came up. Barry asked, do genetically modified seeds or organisms have a role to play for sustainable agriculture? So Julie, Davenson and I both answered with different responses. I just wanted to reiterate, I think there's a lot in the agroecology scientific arenas that are that are seeing the benefits of GMOs, especially technologies like CRISPR, that you can use genes that are not as dissimilar from the plant that you're modifying, for advancing seed technology and advancing seed production systems. I think the majority of agroecologists that I sit with and talk with most are on the European side, where we're much more wary about including GMOs in our food system. And I tend to sit in that field more so, even though I do hear the arguments on the other side that feeding the world might be, we might need to have more GMOs to feed the world. But as Kate pointed out, I think there is still this huge challenge of the inability of those seeds to reproduce once they cycle through their production. So that's a huge problem for many countries around the world, and where people can afford to purchase seeds every year.
Yeah, and the patents on them make them inaccessible.
Reinmar, there's a question from Christine Pellerin. What has been the effect of the destruction of U.S. aid and deportation of farm workers? And maybe I'd follow that up and add, if we were going to be able to rebuild U.S. aid in the future, are there changes that you would do to help do farming differently?
I love that question, John. And one thing that I've been thinking about lately is a Project 2029, kind of a how to, once Cory Booker's president, how do we rebuild the USDA and the research? And I think there's a lot about USAID that is excellent, and there's a lot that creates dependencies. A lot of the USAID funds a lot of agricultural research at land-grant universities in the United States, fundamental basic research, which is interesting. And to the extent that that research and the USAID can start, recreating that seed company in Mali that was kind of a local seed company, where it promoted kind of what we call food sovereignty, which is kind of ownership and control of the food that you produce and eat. To that extent, I think the USAID could be really important. But to the extent that it's used to manipulate other countries, originally, during the Cold War, and to create export markets for the United States, then I think that those are ways that it could be improved.
So USAID has had some dependency problems in its international programs. Is basically what you're saying. Is that right?
It has. I don't know the distribution of USAID programs right now, but yeah, some of the economic thinking behind it is pretty traditional.
Yeah.
And some of the crop genetics and kind of it fits in, a lot of the research fits into the industrial model, which really creates dependencies on a global food system, which is, I think, a little dangerous.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think it was constructed on a model that is really a kind of out of date now, but as the World Bank is and other large players in this international game. Well, we're coming to a close here. I would like to ask one other question to bring things back down to the level of New Hampshire, which is we have a very short growing season. So I just want to know what you all think about how, well, there's a way of thinking about bringing, imports of food as potentially being maybe the issue is transport. What if we had all of the trucks that bring transport food items, if they were all electric, would that kind of solve the problem, or do we need to move toward a lot more food preservation if we're going to focus our our production more into this very short growing season of New England.
Mm.
We need to go
Well-
back to a lot of pickling and that kind of thing, which people are very much out of the habit of doing.
I feel like this is a question for some of the gardeners in the room or those who have been a part of local VORs or other programs where they've really tried to eat within a 100-mile radius. I feel like those efforts really have been very instructive, but again, embarking on teaching others about that, I think is really important, as well as maybe having policies that label food automatically as far as its destination, where it came from, so that and subsidizing local food so that it's not difficult for local farmers to compete in a grocery store. I don't know, like I love using policy to help our markets shift. I think that's really helpful and essential.
And we did see a lot of funding through the previous administration come in to support rebuilding, particularly middle of the supply chain infrastructure, which would have included for processing. There are some regional plants. I know there's a project in Maine and I think also in Vermont where they're able to process vegetables. There's a lot we can grow and store and process and freeze. It's not just canning. So but it's a matter of bringing that infrastructure back to our region and then creating the aggregation points to support that and then opening the market access. And so it's very hard competing with these distributors as well for market space. And so through policy that could help shift that as well. But even though we have a short growing season, there's still plenty we can produce in our region and preserve. And there's lots of food that is, produced year round in our region, from dairy to, different meat and other products as well. So
Mhm.
I admire you for being able to focus on these things when the world is such a mess right now.
Every little bit helps. 3
Yeah.
new messages. Uh-huh.
I think it's possible, and I think, it's a matter of mindset shift. And so we've been told that certain things are not possible. And so when we shift our mind and when we ask what's possible, I think that's when we can start to imagine a new future, a new way of being. And so I think the systems at play want us to think that we don't have options and there aren't pathways forward, but there are, and they're only limited by our creativity and our imagination and our willpower, our will to make it happen.
Along those lines, Julie, how do you suggest you involve the younger generation in this? That's a question from Amy Evans.
Julie G or
not
Julie
just you, but
S?
any of you,
Any of
any
us.
of you three.
Well, I would say, at least a lot of university students that I talk to, predominantly at Dartmouth these days, but or recently, are very interested in food systems. There's a lot of interesting courses on food systems. We had during the pandemic, a study abroad that was just in our local area in the watershed of the Connecticut River Valley. That a lot, we had tons of interest in, and so yeah, I think students want to reconnect with food systems. They want to have land. They want to be able to farm. The problem is that structurally it's very difficult to access land. It's very difficult to have your own farm, and it's difficult to learn these things. A lot of our technical colleges have closed for helping students to learn about agriculture. So we need to have more people engaging in community gardens at all different levels within schools. So supporting our schools and establishing community gardens, or having master gardeners interact with school students or bring them to their land where they can learn those things. So really it's about reconnecting people who are doing these things with the people who do want to learn it, but maybe just have no idea how, they don't have access.
Yeah, there were some programs that were and have been funding for which has recently been frozen in local markets and local farm to school programs where students are able to get involved. But I think with a lot of these, it's hard to imagine the transition because food is produced so cheaply when you just look at the price. And so the answer to you can't produce all your food in New Hampshire if you want to eat at the same cost. And you can't really involve students unless you're willing to fund it. And I think those funding investments are so important. And they allow us to imagine and to create the experiments. And you fund one experiment, and then it encourages its neighbors, and you get this contagion spreading effect where people see what's possible. So I encourage everyone to support USDA funding for these types of programs.
Mhm. Well, I think we'll have to leave it there for this evening. That's a nice concluding note. It in some ways it seems like what's needed is for people in general, for society to become become conscious again of how we produce food. That's the habit that we're really out of, is we're just not used to thinking about it. Consumers are consumers and they're not really thinking about how the food gets to where it needs to be. And that's probably going to have to change in some manner, seems like. So I would like to thank all of you very, very much, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Snorek, and Julie Davenson. And so grateful that you could make it tonight, and you could share your insights and experiences with us. And everyone in the audience, thank you very much as well. John Gage, thank you very much. And we will see you. Oh, wait, I have to go through the coming attractions, which are very important. And I'm now going to share my screen, so don't go away. Almost forgot, because usually we have Susan Richmond here to do it, and she's not with us today. No, that's not it. Ugh, this is it. Okay, is this visible? New Hampshire Food Systems Statewide Gathering 2025. It's visible. Okay, very good. This is our highly recommended in-person gathering on 21st to welcome the New Hampshire Food and Agriculture Strategic Plan of the New Hampshire Food Alliance and other collaborating organizations. Space is limited. Registration closes on May 9th, but please do, if you possibly can, join in. Secondly, on May 8th, coming up sooner, on May 8th, we've got a conversation with Mariah Blake, author of They Poisoned the World. This is a book about PFAS, so very relevant in New Hampshire. And to anybody involved in our plastics and environmental working groups, very welcome there. This will be very interesting. It's excellent newly published book. On the 13th of May, we have, together with New Hampshire Healthy Climate, we are sponsoring a talk on environmental and community health benefits of green burials. The end of our lives is not the end of our influence on the environment. So May 13th, 7 p.m., we have a virtual talk on that important subject. Please join our efforts. We've got 5 working groups. You can always come in and start another working group, but join in, have fun, and do good. And that's all very important. This is our legislative spreadsheet, an example of it. One of the things that we do is encourage people to testify for good environmental bills and against bad ones. And if you're interested in doing something very concrete, just scan this QR code and get involved in our No
Reinmar.
Plastic Bags Yes.
I think you
Hello?
have the wrong, I think you have the wrong PowerPoint up.
Oh dear. Okay. Yes, what happens is it levels over. Let's see. Okay, are you seeing that one?
Not yet.
Okay. Still not, huh? It's funny, this
Something flashed
never
and then
happens.
disappeared.
What's that? It disappeared?
Yeah.
This never happens except in the actual public things. Otherwise, never. I do this all the time with my class and it never have a problem. This is very odd. Okay, so what I have to do is close this one. I imagine the audience has probably just laughed by now anyway. Uh, Anything visible now?
Yes, yes, we see the New Hampshire Food System statewide gathering. Yes.
Right. No one will ever know why these things happen the way they do, but anyway, that's what they do. So that's our 21st. This is on May 8th. This is on the 13th. Our working groups, legislative spreadsheet. Please join us also in our No Plastic Bags initiative. And that is us. Visit us on our website. And thank you all for being here. Thank you very much to our speakers, and have a great time, everybody. We'll see you next time.